Can you give cannabis to kids? The short answer is yes. Welcome to Your Health, Your Choice. I'm Dr. David Berger, and I'm excited to welcome Moriah Barnhart to the show. Hi, Mo. How you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing great. For those who don't know, Moriah is the one of the co-founders of CannaMoms, which is one of the leading advocates for medical cannabis for children. She and I have been working and fighting for this for many years now. We think it's been about 6 or 7 years now, and we're warriors together in this, and it's such a pleasure to actually have you on our show. So it's hi there. It's great to see you.
It's great to see you, and I appreciate that you're doing things like this.
Yeah, well, it's been a labor of love, and as you know, we're trying to get the word out to as many people as possible, and we're trying to educate people because not enough people are getting good information. So we kind of took it upon ourselves to be an information provider.
I love it.
Yeah. So tell us, Mo, what brought you into the medical cannabis world?
My daughter Dahlia was diagnosed with brain cancer at the age of 2, and unfortunately back then there just wasn't a lot of knowledge, a lot of education. Charlotte's Web, CNN stuff hadn't come out yet. Um, there weren't really products available for children. Dosing wasn't known, and so I jumped in head first, basically to um, waters that were pretty uncharted territory at that point.
And tell us, so with your daughter Dahlia, so tell us a little bit about her and what you were looking for in terms of therapy.
Yeah, initially you're in shock. Your child has been diagnosed with something no parent in a million years would ever guess, from, insomnia to ADHD to flu-like symptoms. Nobody would guess brain cancer. So in that state of shock, initially I just wanted to save her life. That is your goal. Um, Something like brain cancer is about as deadly as it gets of a diagnosis in the world of critically and chronically ill children. And after a few months of treatment, of surgeries and chemotherapy, and watching her suffering the symptoms and side effects of the drugs that they were giving her, honestly, it shifted from wanting to save her life to wanting to save her quality of life. Whatever time she had left here, I just wanted it to be enjoyable and I wanted to alleviate her suffering. So,
Yeah, I can't even imagine. Many parents wouldn't even, unless they've walked in your shoes. We've certainly had some significant medical challenges with Benjamin, especially during his first 2 years of life. But the overwhelming majority of the time, he wasn't suffering. It sucked. Being in a hospital, being in the ICU, we were in and out for a good part of the first year of his life. But we definitely had that. But to see a child of yours just feeling bad, of just like wanting those symptoms to end, I can't even imagine how that must feel for you.
there's definitely no way to appropriately express, as a parent and as a mother, my purpose in life is to protect my children. First and foremost, to save them, right? We keep them alive. There's this old joke, as long as your children make it out of childhood alive. That becomes very much not a joke when your child is genuinely resting their life in your hands. Every decision that you make could potentially be the make or break for whether they live or die. And in that situation, I really can't put into words when it shifts from wanting to save their life to, if you had to make a decision to save their life, have them be severely disabled and suffering versus salvage the quality of life for the time they have left on earth. That is the most heart wrenching, unexplainable, kind of inhumane situation to be put in.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. My heart goes out to what you've been through with your family. So how did you first start to learn about medical cannabis treatments, and how did tell me about the path that you followed to get to actually doing this?
Well, we were very fortunate that over the decades that cannabis was criminalized, many people either disregarded those laws or lobbied to change those laws. So from the 60s and 70s, 80s, AIDS, to cancer. So patients around the country, lawbreakers who believe in personal freedoms, people of all different demographics have kept this alive. So by the time my daughter was diagnosed, we really had no stories about children using cannabis yet. or even CBD or hemp. This is, 8+ years ago. And at that time, what we did have was a lot of adults telling their stories, adults saying that cannabis works for the nausea and vomiting induced by chemotherapy, that cannabis works for the pain. Dahlia has been on many vincristine and vinblastine, these chemotherapies that cause irreparable nerve damage, brain damage. And so a lot of the scientific research was saying it should help with nerve damage. It should help actually be able to repair brain damage. It should actually be able to help kill cancer cells. But after watching your child suffer so immensely for so long, the fact that other adults were coming out and saying, this helped with my nausea, this helped with my pain, this helped me enjoy being alive, that's really when I started Dahlia on cannabis. Was I hoped that it would help save her life, and today I believe it did. But in reality, all I was seeking at that point was to alleviate the suffering, and it did do that.
Yeah. Now, as you know, I've been as a holistic pediatrician using herbs in pediatric patients for almost 25 years. And I know that I had a lot of figuring things out on my own because there weren't the studies or anything really available. And so, how did you even know like what types of dosing protocols to use?
We did not. And so this is a story I don't tell often, and perhaps should, because as more parents and people of all ages, because something we always say, you and I discuss this regularly, is if something is safe for children, we automatically know it's safe for adults, but not the other way around. And so a lot of the trial and error, start low and go slow, these things that were very unscientific at the beginning, we've actually found them to be, in their lack of scientific founding, still to this day, pretty helpful advice. There really wasn't. I had Raphael Meshulam was the first and only person who gave me any type of dosing advice, and literally the extent of that was, don't ever start a child on more than 5 milligrams of THC at a time. And that was it. That's like the to start with that amount of information is so minimal. And I was friends with so many physicians around the country who were actually quite well known, renowned even around the world for cannabis, and would not give us dosing advice. So the story is, I overdosed Dahlia on cannabis. I moved her. After our initial inpatient time at St. Jude in Memphis, they allowed us to go to Colorado, and there I legally could access cannabis. And in a legal state, the product that she would need was not available. You could not get the same product twice if you found one that worked. You were still going to have to make it in your kitchen to dose it correctly. And I, in fact, with weeks and months of no sleep, in a PTSD, ridden stupor, I miscalculated the math, and I was trying to give her 5 milligrams of THC and ended up giving her 50 milligrams of THC. And it was a very, very scary time. But the most important part is she was fine. She slept. That was it. She had a stomach ache.
Yeah, I think certainly a lot of people have taken too much, especially in an oral edible form. We know how that can even make things a little bit more challenging, a little bit less predictable too. So I totally hear you, but sometimes trial and error is, of course, what this is all based upon. Um, so. So back then when you were there, so you're in terms of your ability to get them cannabis. So how did you even know what to do?
Well, like I said, I have such a deep seated gratitude for just those old, when you think of like older people who by the 70s and then 80s and 90s just felt that this was very much anti will of the people, kind of freedom fighter type personalities. I was with a little Christian nonprofit outside of St. Jude. So I was between their housing and St. Jude's campus, walking around with this very illegal concentrate and edibles and things that people had just shipped me from their kitchen. They literally, there was a few states legal at the time. They managed to access product both legally and not and get it tested. So to the best of their ability, they knew what was in it. The dosing was not exact, but much better than even some people do today when you're making gummies and things in your kitchen. Kind enough to send me product, and starting her on those products in Memphis illegally is what prompted us to get them to eventually give us permission to go to Colorado so that we could try a plethora of products. We know with botanicals, it is trial and error. You often have to try a multitude of products and doses in order to find what works best for that person. So,
Now, and once you did find what worked for her, were you able to find that it was consistently working? Did you find that you still, as time went on, need to make additional dosing adjustments, or did you kind of get into more of a cruise control mode?
yeah, and so I think that this is something, regardless of your child's diagnosis, any special needs parents can relate to. Every year, every few months, there's something new. Something has gotten better and something has gotten worse. Something's disappeared, something else has arisen. So with Dahlia, initially it was, nausea and vomiting, pain, sleep. It moved on to ADHD, autism spectrum disorder. At one point, she had been diagnosed with oppositional defiant disorder. And so your focus, and that's only in 11 years of life, and I just named 1/10 maybe of the things we've dealt with, from infections to brain damage to cognitive delays. So every few months, that product might stop working if a tolerance is built, even if you're just working on the same issue. If you have one particular issue, if, say, I have anxiety or depression long term, or I'm an adult on the spectrum and I know what my personal brain wiring already is, even in that case, I'm still going to build a tolerance to a natural and safe plant and perhaps have to take a break, start lower again, change products up with botanical medicines. And then with children as they're growing, of course, like I said, your focus is changing as they develop.
Right, right. So tell us, how's Dahlia doing today?
Oh, she's amazing. You would just, nobody has any idea unless you tell. And she's actually still on treatment, and nobody has any idea unless you tell them. She's just wonderful.
Yeah, and doing well academic. How's she doing from a school perspective and just everything? I mean, is she able to be like a kid?
She has developed so wildly beyond our expectations. And I know every parent says stuff like this, and lots of medical professionals feed into it because we all want to praise and love our children. But she has developed so far beyond, I think, what anyone expected. She is learning to read and write. She has learned mathematics. She speaks like an adult, which at, the point that we had started around cannabis, she was probably still primarily saying 2 sentence words, moving up to 3 sentence words. And from there, just kind of overnight, that part of her brain clicked back on and she could speak like an adult. And then one day she suddenly understood how math worked. And so these things are, it's like parts of her brain just are continuously repairing themselves, which is something we, in fact, know cannabis and certain cannabinoids have the potential to do.
Yeah. So let's move on to a little discussion more about from an advocacy perspective. When I started getting both into herbal medicine and then, of course, with the medical cannabis, I realized that I was, because of the two initials after my name, MD, I knew that I was going to be given a platform that would allow people to listen to me. Become a board certified pediatrician and you're out there talking about it. And obviously, there's a legitimizing that happens there that is not so easy for other people to get. So tell me a little bit about how'd you get involved in the advocacy side of these things that have made this movement grow so amazingly well.
Well, of course, it would be a super cool story to be like, this mom's daughter got sick and she suddenly became all these things. But the truth is, I'm a lifelong activist. So for me, it was a very natural undertaking. Once it was brought to my attention, and the cause was brought to my doorstep and I was aware of it. From there, I couldn't just get Dahlia what she needed and close ourselves in to our own home and wish for the best. That seems so unfair. There's so many other
Okay.
parents with suffering children. And in sharing our journey, the hope was, like I've said a million times, that it's not a last resort for other parents. If your child is suffering, it's needless not to try something that's so safe and effective, and therefore it should always be a first option. So stepping into the role of this kind of advocacy and what's become such a dirty word, activism, acting on behalf of this, was very natural for us. I felt that working with these other children was in one sense, it's probably something similar to survivor's guilt. If any other special needs parents can relate to your child doing well when so many other children don't, and they don't make it, and even if they do make it, they end up very severely disabled and suffering a whole lot through what life they do live. So I think that part of the drive for me 8 years later and continuing to do the 20-hour days sometimes and the I think that part of that is that my daughter is doing really well and I owe the universe this payment. But another part is simply if you share your journey and that can help another family who's going to walk a similar path, why not?
Yeah, that's it. Now, what would you say are some of the main misconceptions, things that you hear about from the naysayers about pediatric usage of medical cannabis?
Well, I think that, nearly a decade ago, it was kind of regular to say things like, it's not just about getting high. And also, like, CBD is not psychoactive. Well, CBD is psychoactive. A decade later, we can kind of comfortably say, depending on what you're referencing. I used to say it was euphoric. And when these politicians who were pushing CBD laws to try to circumvent broader legislation would say CBD is non psychoactive, I would say, I want you to take a gram of it on camera and let them continue recording you for the next 3 hours and then say it's not psychoactive, because enough of anything can have these kinds of effects, right? So we don't need to say it's not just about getting high, because in reality it is all about getting high for some people in certain circumstances. If you're in excruciating pain coming out of surgery, they're giving you morphine to get you high. That is the entire intent at that moment. Being quote unquote high is not something we need to be scared of when that's the appropriate measure that's being taken by medical professionals to help alleviate the suffering of that patient. So, yes, sometimes these children are going to you're never going to get that perfect amount that doesn't quite alleviate all the suffering, but also doesn't get you what we call high. Sometimes these kids are going to be giggling. They're going to be hungry. They're going to have all those stereotypical symptoms and side effects. And it is such a relief to our hearts as mothers to see them having such joy. Why are we giving these children drugs like benzos and morphine and these deadly, highly addictive drugs that only exist to get them high and not blinking an eye? But then if cannabis has a little bit of the side effect of that extra alleviation of suffering, somehow that is going to make the devil rise from the earth. So I think those are kind of some of the things we saw being said early on that we've shifted with time.
Yeah, and I appreciate that you said that. When I've always kind of differentiated between a person being high versus being stoned and functional or not functional. And like, when a person's down, you want to go, you'd like to be up, and that's the direction that high goes. So to me, it's always been much more about functionality. Is this person functioning better, or is this person functioning worse with the treatment that's happening? And if your kid gets a little bit more happy, if your kid wants to dance around more, if your kid is just seeming wants to hug you more, that's not a bad thing. And especially with the children that I work with autism, that may be the exact thing that parent is looking for at the time. So to me, again, high, happy, if you're sick, you deserve to be happy. And if it's okay to be goofy. My goodness, kids are supposed to be goofy. And that's one of the things that a lot of times adults lose as we get older, is we lose some of that goofiness. And then if there's a safe way to bring that back, that's not hurting the body, unlike things like alcohol, then that's a truly blessed thing. And obviously, we've talked also ourselves about the much bigger picture of legalization and making this type of amazing plant medicine available to everybody. But at the same time, we're also wanting to make sure that kids across the country, we're fortunate here in Florida to have a system in place that we're actually able to do this. So, so many other places, I
Mhm.
have patients all over the place in other countries, and they're like, yeah, it's great in theory. We have a law here, but there's no product even. And that's just so sad to know that there's like something out there. It's like you can't, you want to reach it, you feel like you could just put your hands on it, but then like someone's pulling it away, or it slips out of your grip. And that's just such a tough thing. But fortunately here in Florida, we're not dealing with that. Now, how do you see the field of pediatric medical cannabis evolving?
I think that at some point it's going to be so normalized. If you take a look at Israel, it's probably a good example. It's so much safer and more effective than so many of the dangerous medicines our children are being given. And I understand that not everyone has a special needs, a critically or chronically ill child, but everybody knows someone, even if it's through the grapevine. So open your eyes, be willing to listen, know and understand these children are on very dangerous, highly deadly and addictive drugs, from benzos to um, opioids. You know, my daughter and all of the children who are diagnosed with pediatric cancer are given drugs like morphine from the opium plant, like it's candy. I shouldn't say like it's candy. Most of these physicians are very responsible, but these children are suffering immensely and they are given very high doses of very strong medications. And to have a plant that is safe and effective be able to replace these types of medications is a dream come true for any medical professional and any mother. So I think that once we start working together the way you and I have across the country, I think we're going to see this very normalized in the field of pediatrics.
Yeah, and I'm so excited because, and Israel has certainly been really such a shining star in terms of moving the ball forward from a research perspective. And knowing that at the Technion that they are now creating databases where they can literally match cancer DNA, cancer genetics, with the genetics of particular cannabis strains or particular plant, and they're even able to show that what certain nutrients being used may make it more or less effective against the particular form of cancer. But I mean, the what their goal is to literally just be able to send them some tumor cells that have the genetics in them, to be able to say, okay, this is the cross match for the thing that is going to actually kill off this cancer cell and kill and to be able to reduce the cancer. And that's certainly something that we would have never even in a heartbeat been able to think of something like that, let alone what we're seeing what they're doing out of Israel also with autism. And our country is just so backwards here in that we're still not allowed to do the research. All the federal government has to do is to declassify it. At the FDA level, that doesn't even require legislation in terms of legalization, but just even to take it down so that we can this rescheduling it so that people can do the types of research to move things forward. And man, it's been so long that we've been thinking that this is coming, and it's a crying shame that we haven't at least moved into that. But I'm the eternal optimist. I'm hoping that we're going to be able to. I know as a physician, it would be awesome if I actually had medical research, not just to back up what I'm doing when I talk to other people, but more importantly, to help people to optimize what it is that we can do for people. And we're just kind of, I feel like we're treading water at this point, and I thought we were moving forward, and I realize that kind of coronavirus, of course, slows everything else down. But, I'm hoping that as we get out of coronavirus, that we'll be able to move our research into other directions. Now, tell me, Mo, what would you say you're focusing on now? What is Mo's goals for the next couple of years?
Well, this goes in line with what you were just talking about. So I'll respond first to what you just said in two brief pieces. One, corruption, and two, um, the descheduling. So the overall idea is that I started working on medical legislation primarily focused on pediatrics, but with the intent of garnering this legislation for all patients. I very quickly came to realize that without addressing disparity rates, diversity, equity, things of these nature, it's not just about sick children, it's about everyone's children. So in starting Wise Florida and then moving that toward a nationwide initiative of mothers who are against prohibition, who believe that prohibition is harming our children and that legalization would in fact rectify some of the damage that the war on drugs and particularly prohibition has done. But with regards to corruption, we know that Bill Clinton signed a patent application for cannabinoids as antioxidants and neuroprotectants in the 90s. We know that during that time, it remained a Schedule 1 drug as more dangerous than meth, than heroin, than cocaine. We know that during that time, the United States government, was sending money to Israel to do that research, and all around the world to do the research outside of the United States. They knew that it had medicinal benefits. It remains to this day a Schedule 1 drug. That is corruption. There is no way around it. But with regards to descheduling, which used to be at the beginning of this journey, was my main intent. Um, People should be able to grow it in their backyard and juice it in their kitchen, but they should also be able to walk into a hospital and get an actual medicine that we know exactly what's in it. It should just be available in both ways, personal freedoms and medically. But the DEA actually acknowledged in 2016, when they finally responded to, I think, a 2009 petition. I had been petitioning everyone for many, many years, including the Obama administration. And looking back on that, the DEA acknowledges that we would be breaking multiple global treaties if we did anything other than reschedule to a Schedule 2. That would be the most that they could reschedule it without breaking those global treaties. So I think it's a multifold journey that we're on. We need to rewrite these treaties. We need to reassess whether we're going to be a part of these treaties. We know that the global legislative changes started in the Western world. So we've done a lot of damage to the rest of the world. When you're talking about these other countries where people don't even have it available to them, we are so grateful. As flawed as Florida is, the fact that our children can get this medicine today, we are so privileged, and we do acknowledge that regularly. We've done documentaries in Japan and Brazil and places where there's just really no way to get this medicine for your child, because even if you wanted to do it illegally here, yes, it's very scary and it's very dangerous, but you could probably access it. There are some places in the world where you can't even access it. So we need to be looking at making big strides and changes long term that affect the global stance of cannabis, while in the meantime doing things within our means. If we're not capable of rescheduling or descheduling altogether, which would be the best thing, and we're not able to reschedule past to Schedule 2, what next? Do we reschedule to Schedule 2 so that physicians like yourself are now able to do research while maintaining legislation that takes away the federal government's right and ability to enforce in states that have their own laws? These are things that we really need to be having conversations about as we move legislation forward in the next couple of years.
Yeah, I think that you really just summarized that just fantastic. And thank you so much for coming on with us. I always learn something from you. That's great. I'm just proud to be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with you and in this march forward. We know that we have a lot of work ahead of us still, but we know that people such as us who are out there fighting the good fight, and also more importantly, so overwhelmingly positive now in our community. Even when Florida passed our law at over 70% for the constitutional amendment, I mean, let's face it, what garners 70% agreement in our country right now? Maybe Santa Claus and puppy dogs, but there's really not much else that people agree on. And that number's gone up since the law was passed. That's, when people now were more than 5 years in and people have seen that the sky hasn't fallen, that it's a much more popular thing than even then. So I wanted again thank you so much for coming on with us, and it's just been wonderful. I want to invite everybody, please, if you haven't subscribed to our channel, to please do so. Please share this with other people and join us on our other social media availabilities. So have a great day, everybody. Mo, once again, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for not making us fight alone.
Absolutely. It's been a joy. Have a nice day.